All right, we're live, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. It looks like we are.
I'll make sure we are on the deal here.
So I feel so bad sometimes for our guests because, like, I don't know, man. We're just having some fun. And today,
Yeah,
we're missing the A from Jat.
we're missing the glue that really holds this group together. And
He is the glue.
yeah. So do you know all the details about why Alan's not here?
I know I got the text that you got.
Yeah.
But
So
do you want to tell everybody who's watching?
Sure. So for those of you who are watching, Alan lives in San Diego or in that area, and there's a bit of a blackout going on there. The power is out. And so it looks like it's not going to be on till Sunday or something like that. So he's been running around all day trying to find a generator, and so the show must go on. And so we're going to be just moving forward, pressing on without him. Alan will be here in spirit, and we'll keep going here. It's unfortunate because this is our last book club meeting together, our last session, right?
For this book, yeah. I don't know if we're going to do another one.
Sure. So, and that, I mean, we probably will. We'll see. Yeah, that'll be interesting. I have some ideas for what we could do. But this session is interesting because we're going to be talking about postmodernism, and postmodernism is not really. I mean, it's going to be hard to define. We're going to talk about that. It's not technically a full worldview, or it doesn't. The approach that James Sire takes to this particular philosophy is a little different. Than some of the other philosophies, the other worldviews. You got to go back to a different starting point. We're going to talk about that. So for those who kind of aren't familiar with what we're doing here, we're going through James Sire's book, The Universe Next Door, as you can see there, 6th edition, I think. And this has been a good series, kind of getting an overview of the different worldviews that are out there. And what he does is he has about 8 questions that he asks of all these worldviews or philosophies. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to talk about some of those questions together, and things that we find interesting about this particular philosophy, postmodernism. And then we're going to look at, what we maybe like about it or what we don't like about it, share some stories, that kind of thing, some quotes. So it might be helpful as we launch in here to talk about what is postmodernism. And this is where we end up kind of hitting a brick wall right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Because postmodernism is really difficult to define. This is actually how Sire opens up the chapter.
Yeah.
But the problem of the definition of postmodernism. I've heard one philosophy professor I had when I was doing my master's, he said it's kind of like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. Okay. Everyone kind of has their own definition of what postmodernism is supposed to be. And the term is used. I think it got its roots in architecture first. That's how it was being used, and now it's kind of a broader philosophical term. So, John, help us out here.
Sure.
What is postmodernism entail? Maybe that's a good way to start, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. So it would entail, well, 2 things that come to my mind is relativism, right? So, and certainly moral relativism. And one of the things that really come to my mind is in the context of, let's just use this book for an example, right? If I'm a postmodernist and I'm reading this book, I'm bringing meaning to the text. So it's not the author, it's not Sire that's bringing meaning, it's me. So it's not necessarily about what Sire means to get across, but it's what I'm taking Sire to get across, which means I can bring any meaning to pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And it very quickly, very quickly, postmodernism, I think, falls apart. I mean, it right up front in the chapter, it says a culture cannot lose its philosophical center without most serious consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And even postmodernists say that it just does this. It's Sire quotes a bunch of postmodernists, and one of them says, still today, no consensus obtains on what postmodernism really means. And then he goes on to say it entails relativism, and it's an ironic ideological stance, and ethos bordering on kitsch and camp. It's postmodernism has an incredulity towards meta narratives,
Mm-hmm.
meaning any overarching story that seeks to make meaning of reality is shunned. It's all about your experience, Tim. You know, how are you feeling about the world today? And so it gets rid of all truth, which is self-refuting. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. And I think, I mean, that's the main takeaway, I think, is that idea that there is no truth on this view. There's, and you mentioned story, you know, on page 206, says with postmodernism, no story can have any more credibility than any other. All stories are equally valid, being so validated by the community that lives by them. And so you're right. There's no true story. You know, somebody wrote a book called The Story of Reality, and they try to argue. You know who? Do you recognize that title? No.
It seemed to come to my mind. I think I might own it.
Yeah, and the whole book is premised, and Greg actually addresses postmodernism in the book, is that there is a true story of reality, okay, and that flies in the face of this postmodernist philosophy. So yeah, it really does come down to truth. In fact, I think one of the sections in the book he calls the death of truth. Because there can't be kind of capital T truth. Now, it's true that postmoderns will use what they would call the correspondence theory of truth. So what corresponds to reality. We're going to talk about why they can't go that route. But they do talk about what works, you know. So it's true, little t true, if it works, okay? It's a pragmatic.
For who?
And this is the problem with any kind of a pragmatic view of truth is, first of all, you're right. The question is true for who? There's so many questions. There's so many questions that undermine, I think, that original claim that truth is what works. Because for some people it's going to work. For some people it's not. Sometimes there are things we know that are not true, and yet they work just fine. And there are things that don't work, but they are true. You know what I'm saying? And so there seems to be the correspondence theory of truth. When you apply it to this theory, it's almost like you need the correspondence theory to even use this theory. So it's very interesting. So the idea is there is no capital T truth. It's kind of hidden from all of us. And you can't get at it. That's the problem with the postmodern.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, right. Nietzsche. So the author Sire starts off with quoting Nietzsche, you know, the death of God. What's that famous?
The Madman.
The Madman, right? And but Nietzsche also he says he said, "You have your way, I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, the only way, it does not exist."
Yeah.
You know, and that's actually, I think, gets at the heart of postmodernism. Yeah. It manifests itself in the culture as you do you, I'll do me. Just let me be me. Yeah. You know, and that's why I think that it's, you know, oftentimes when I start talking about this stuff, I struggle with it because it seems just so far kind of out there and so intuitively false.
Yeah.
I'm like, why are we even talking about this? but we have to because it's influencing the culture.
Mhm.
And I mean, we live in a postmodern culture. I actually think that we've probably gone one step beyond that now. Now we're in like what Abdu Murray calls a post-truth culture, where now we're even willing to say that there might be truth, but we just don't care about it, right?
And just on that point, I think that the post-truth culture is a kind of a rebound from postmodernity, because people can see that postmodernism is unlivable. You know, we really want to make objective truth claims and moral judgments that we think are true. And so if we want to do that, we have to say that truth exists. And so the problem is there are things that are true that we don't like sometimes. And this is where the post-truth idea comes into play, right? As long as I like it, then and it's true, okay, it works. But as soon as I don't like it, then it's not true anymore. Yeah. So look this is playing out politically. I mean, turn on the news and you see post-truth in play, okay, on both sides of the aisle. So when something's going your way, okay, now we're talking facts. It's all good. It's true. But then things aren't going my way. I don't like it anymore. But that doesn't change my mind, because ultimately my preferences trump objective truth, right? They trump the facts. So that's the post-truth idea. So you're right. There is some truth in there, but preferences ultimately win the day.
Yeah, and that's actually, I think, the first point that Sire really draws out is there's been a flipping, you know, of where we draw meaning from, of what he calls first things. Yeah, you know, where what we're he says, in other words, there's been a shift in first things from being to knowing to constructing meaning. Yeah. So you know, what we do is through our language we seek to construct meaning. So that's where it becomes all subjective or relative. And that's where like reading the book I brought up, right? If I can read a sentence and make it mean whatever I want it to mean, it actually loses all meaning. Yeah. Altogether, in an ultimate sense. And in that way, postmodernism just dies almost immediately.
Yeah. So let's flesh that out a little bit, because you're right. There's this, Sire talks a lot about this. It's about language, right? And we're constructing with our language, we're constructing these stories, or whatever you want to call them, meta narratives. And so the problem is that language needs to be interpreted, right? And what he talks about is the interpretation, the person interpreting actually brings the meaning to the language, to the text, if we're talking about a book. And this has serious problems. I mean, those who are writing books about this, surely they must see that this is self-refuting, right? So explain that to me, John.
Man, I wish I could, dude. These people are like Jacques Derrida, and these people that we read, you know, they're really smart. Friedrich Nietzsche. Sure. They were really smart. I will say something about Nietzsche, at least, that I think is absent from maybe some modern atheists. In a philosophical sense, at least, he's honest. Like, he sees the writing on the wall, and we see that in The Madman when he's saying the death of God, you know, God is dead. Yeah. You know, like who can wipe away the entire horizon, right? And you know, do we smell God's decomposing, right? And because we've killed him, you and I, is what he says. And at least he's honest, and he sees the writing on the wall, that as we get rid of an objective sense of truth and a moral sense, especially, we go to a very chaotic place. And actually, Sire says that as we go there, it's a formula. He literally says on 207, this is a formula for anarchy. Yeah. When we strip everything of meaning. That means we have no sense of justice, no rule of law, nothing to appeal to outside of ourselves, which is really interesting. But as far as like, how can you write a 500-page book telling me that the author doesn't bring meaning to the text, but the reader. Like, in order to do that, you have to assume that you're saying something.
Yeah, that your audience is going to understand what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and you have and that you have something to say.
Yeah.
You know, the postmodernists, I don't even know if would agree with that. It's crazy stuff, dude.
Yeah.
It's super. What major theme in this chapter really stood out to you?
For me, it was obviously this idea of truth. And just as I read through this philosophy, I kept seeing things that were self-refuting. So this isn't difficult. I don't think you need a PhD to see the problems with postmodernism. You know, you can just, as you're reading, wait a second, they're telling me there is no, we just talked about, you're telling me that there is no objective meaning that the author brings. Well, I'm applying that as I'm reading this. I'm reading these lines and trying to understand about postmodernism here. And so, and it wants me to know that there's no meaning. That means that saying that there's meaning is false. You know what I'm saying? So I have to take these words as what they actually mean and not interpret them to mean the exact opposite of what they mean, right? That's what Sire wants from me. Of course, he's not a postmodernist, but any of these postmodernists, they want me to interpret it. So self-refuting. The idea that there is no truth obviously is self-refuting. There's more things that we'll talk about maybe when we kind of circle back to the end. But that was the biggest thing, was as I'm reading through this, it just seemed like this philosophy, I don't know why it was so appealing. Maybe there's a psychological reason that would motivate someone to adopt this, but just from a rational perspective, it just it seemed to me pretty easy to spot the flaws, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of a big, as I'm reading it, that was kind of jumping out at me. What about you?
Kind of the same thing. I mean, that was certainly the most concerning.
Yeah.
Especially in light of what we know about the current state of culture.
Yeah.
You know, I have a quote here that is just from a presentation that I have on relativism. Have you ever read the Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom?
Not the whole thing, but I've actually listened to audio book. Probably half the book I've listened to.
Right on. You might know this then. He says, there's one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes or says she believes that truth is relative. The students, of course, cannot defend their opinion. It's something with which they have been indoctrinated.
Yeah.
And that's like when we put, that's what I mean when we put things in the context of the current state of culture. Yesterday, I teach a discipleship class at my kids' school. They go to a little classical school, and I teach in the high school. And I have 12 senior boys. And I asked them yesterday, 2 weeks ago, I said, why do you believe what you believe? Why are you a Christian? And they gave a bunch of different answers. You know, my parents taught this to me. The Bible tells me to be, you know, and stuff like this. And then I got to, well, we believe what we believe, at least we ought to, because it's true.
Yeah.
And then yesterday I asked them, okay, what does it mean when I say something is true? And not all of them, but many of them struggled with telling me not only what truth is, but actually buying into the fact that truth exists, right? That there is one way, contrary to what Nietzsche says. There is a right way, even, especially when you start talking about the moral law. You know, very, very often these teens will say, you know, I'll say, okay, is Jesus God? Yes. Did he die on the cross? Yes. Is that true for you, or is it just for you, or is it for everybody? It's for everybody. Okay, cool. But then the second I say abortion is immoral, the conversation completely shifts and changes. And it's because these ideas, right? We can get caught up in the in the complexity of the philosophy. But that these things have trickled their way down through the university and into our culture. And now so much so, according to Bloom, our kids have just been indoctrinated by this stuff, even at a really good classical Christian school.
Yeah.
Shame on us, Tim.
Well, this this reminds me of that Nietzsche quote, "The madman." And you have at the end, he's saying, God is dead, we've killed him. And then at the end, he says, I come too early. My time has not come yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. And this is exactly what you're talking about. Some of these ideas, they were formulated in the academy, and they worked their way slowly into the culture. And now, man, you talk to most students, whether they're Christian or not, whether in the church, going to youth group or not, and they're moral relativists, at least when it comes to some issues. If you talk about torturing babies for the fun of it, then they're like, oh, that's an easier one. Okay. But when you talk about the issues of the day, or you talk about the moral sins they want to engage in, then all of a sudden it's like, no, that's just personal preference, Yeah.
You want to talk about how we got our culture got to where it's at. We have to understand postmodernism. Yeah. You want to start talking about gender issues, right? There's not a prescribed gender to people. I bring my gender to my story, story. Yeah. And it all finds that root in the general principle that there are no meta narratives.
Yeah.
Who really does? If whoever you guys watching, if you guys really want to watch a great talk on this, Os Guinness spoke years ago. I think it's at Stanford. If you Google Os Guinness Stanford truth, it'll pop up. It's like a really dark recording.
Yeah.
And he's just brilliant in general. No notes, this guy. And he's up there and he traces how postmodernism in a very practical, real way has played out in the culture. And he at one point says, so we've shunned this idea of truth and our individual stories, what takes precedence, and he traces it into a woman who won a Nobel Peace Prize. And she wrote an account of her village that was attacked, and all the people burned, and her brother was one of the people stripped naked and burned. Well, it turned out like 85% of what she wrote was completely made up.
Oh, wow.
And when a professor, brought this up, people harped on him. How dare you attack this woman, this indigenous woman? For this is her story. This is her reality. You can't take that from her. And she didn't win a Nobel Peace Prize in fiction.
Yeah.
And then now and just off to my mind, I can see this, how is this played out into our current theories of justice and also critical theory, critical race theory, queer theory. Like all these things find their roots in postmodernism, the rejection of an ultimate meta-narrative, an overarching story, and the adaptation to the idea that it's really selfish. It's just all about, it's my story. I bring my own meaning to the table, which sounds fantastic until you run into somebody who wants to bring a completely different meaning, or their meaning means getting rid of you. But
that's right. I have more to say about that, but Ryan Pauly asked, "Where's Alan?" And you missed.
Who cares?
Alan's got no power. He is looking for a generator right now in San Diego. Apparently,
literally,
lots of people are searching for generators. I guess in that area they just turn the lights out, which is too bad. He wanted to be here. We should have had Ryan Pauly as a special guest. That would have been fun.
That would have been fun.
So, as you were talking, this goes back to some of the things that we've talked about in previous worldviews and previous sessions. There's the idea in philosophy, going back to Aristotle, of this idea of essence kind of preceding existence, and that turned on its head with existentialism, where you have, your existence precedes your essence, and that you exist, you determine what your essence will be. And I see now today, we look at all kinds of issues that are happening, whether it's a transgender issue or whatever, and you are the one that determines your meaning and your value and your purpose and who you are, your identity. All that stuff is self-determined, right? And that actually fits nicely in a postmodern philosophy, right? Postmodern worldview, that you can determine that. So it seems like what's going on in the culture fits real. It's really convenient, right? This postmodern philosophy, even though, like we've talked about, very easy to refute this kind of philosophically when you just think about it. But people often don't think philosophically. They're thinking more about their preferences and what makes them feel good and what they want. And so at the end of the day, they're willing to adopt this worldview for those reasons, not rational reasons, but more motivated by, preferences.
Yeah, it's all, yeah, I think it's all wrapped in together. And I love the fact that we can, when I was reading this chapter, what we're experiencing today was just really starting to pop out at me. I'm like, oh, wait a second, that totally makes sense. Like why we're where we are, with all the stuff that we're talking about. So that's a good point, Tim.
There was other questions that he asked, right? Different worldview questions. When it came to knowledge and ethics, he says all narratives mask a play for power. Any one narrative used as a meta narrative is oppressive. And I just thought, you know what? Christianity then has to be oppressive on this, right? Because it is a meta narrative, right? It's a narrative. In fact, we think it is the story of reality. And because we think that way, according to this philosophy, it's a power play, right? Yeah. That's what Christians are after. It's a power play, and we're trying to oppress those who disagree with us.
Which is like, it's so funny because any one narrative used as a meta narrative is oppressive, but that in and of itself is a meta narrative. So stop oppressing me with your postmodernism, Tim.
Yeah.
You do you, but you can't, because that's just not how the world is. And like Greg calls these things bumps in the reality, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you're a postmodernist, you can't get 2 feet out your front door without bumping into reality around you. Yeah.
So that was, I thought that was interesting. Again, the self-refuting nature of that question. He in question 6, the moral question, right? Morality, like knowledge, is a linguistic construct. Social good is whatever society takes it to be. Now we've talked about this before, but again, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, if someone were to create a worldview map, of the different worldviews, you're going to end up seeing that there's very similar things that show up in all these different philosophies. And we've seen this over and over again, this idea of relativism that ends up being a consequence, right? We started by talking about, I think you read the quote, right? There are consequences. When you remove something huge, like God, out of a worldview, things are going to happen. There's going to be a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And in this case, when you remove truth, when you take away truth, you have now taken away moral truth as well. And then you just determine, it's society that determines what right is and what wrong is. And then you get situations like the Holocaust. You get Nazi Germany, and they are a society, right? And they determine, like, social good, it says here, is whatever society takes it to be. Well, that society took the social good to be, Jews were life unworthy of life.
Yeah.
And who's anyone to judge their social construct? That was their linguistic construct. So here's another example where we want to say, no, it doesn't seem to me, when I look out at the world, it doesn't seem right to me that what they did was good because it was according to their own social construct. No, I want to say that was wrong. And if I was at that culture, if I was in that time, it would have been wrong. No matter what, if everyone agreed that it was right, it still would have been wrong. Well, the only way I can do that is if I'm appealing to an objective moral standard, a moral law that's above their socially constructed law, right? And so the question is, what worldview can account for that? What worldview can explain that, right? And
that's right.
So I hope that people, as we've gone through this, I hope people notice that, we've been studying the different worldviews and philosophies that are out there. And what we're doing is we're just saying, does this explain what I actually see in the world? And my answer is, for this question, and I hope for the people watching, that no, this doesn't do it. This doesn't make sense of objective morality, which is what I think actually exists in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we see a clear biblical example of this in Judges, right? Judges 21, where, in those days there was no king in Israel, is what the scripture said, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
They defined postmodernism hundreds of years before it ever showed up.
Yeah. And then they tried it out. And it didn't go well. You know, and I love the question that, I mean, it's almost a rhetorical question because Sire doesn't get into it, but in the middle of that section, worldview question 6, the morality question.
Yeah.
He asks, but what if an individual refuses to speak the ethical language of their community? Mm-hmm. And this is even in the context of a deeply broken culture like a Nazi Germany or slavery in the early United States. On postmodernism, anybody who would speak against the cultural narrative would be shunned or wrong. That means it leaves no room for a reformer.
Yeah,
there's no room for a Bonhoeffer. There was no room for a Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s. Mm-hmm. By very definition, those people. But that's an interesting thing because on postmodernism, how do you define the standard? I mean, if it's all individualistic, as far as I can tell. Mm-hmm. So is it 10 people that decide something's right, or is it 10,000 people? Mm-hmm. And what of the one person who dissents? Who are you to call them wrong?
And by the way,
it's all really interesting.
Yeah, this is he actually talks about Foucault in this respect, right? This individualistic, you're constructing your own morality. Okay, so let's imagine you're doing that. Well, Foucault, for him, the greatest good is the individual's freedom to maximize pleasure. Okay, that sounds good, doesn't it? Maximize your own pleasure. That's for Foucault. That's what it was about. Well, here's the problem. It says Foucault is so fearful that society constitutes a conspiracy to stifle one's own longing for self-expression that he agonizes profoundly over the question, listen, of whether rape should be regulated by penal justice.
Yeah.
And so it's like, whoa, wait a second. How do we get there? Again, remember we started by talking about consequences, right? For your ideas. Ideas have consequences. Well, for Foucault, who said, look at maximum pleasure, that's what we want. Well, what happens when I want to have sex with that person and they don't want it? For him, it was like, well, if my ethic, my constructed ethic is maximum pleasure, then that means rape is okay. Yeah, and he obviously struggled with that. How do you penalize rape if that's the case?
And That's a perfect example of ideas have consequences. Postmodernism has consequences, and one of those consequences is that it undermines sin. And it also ultimately undermines any system of justice. So it's not just a biblical understanding of sin. It's any system of justice is undermined, whether it be biblical or what have you. There is no justice on this view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For question 7, the question is about what does history look like, that kind of thing. And for postmodernism, I hadn't thought of this before. And actually till recently, I think actually in a meeting we had yesterday, this idea came up about history kind of being in flux. When it comes to postmodernism, again, there's no real truth that corresponds to reality. And so when your take on history is always going to be changing. Okay. And I just thought it was interesting that kind of as a contemporary example, we have his name, Ellen Page.
Yeah.
Has come out transgendered just this week, I think.
Yeah.
And now goes by the name Elliot Page, and has changed pronouns to him and they or there or something like that. Here's my point though. When I started looking at the credits of former movies that now Elliot's been in, the names have been changed, the pronouns, I'm saying? History is in flux. You can just change history because there is no real truth. And so that whatever is constructed today can just be applied back to the past. Right. And and this is the kind of thing, I don't know if it's identical, but when you read 1984 and you go through and they're constantly scrubbing history, changing history to make it whatever they want it to be. Because at the end of the day, they determine what's true. And even though people were there and they knew such and such a person, this is what happens in 1984, spoiler alert, someone will go missing. Someone will go missing because they don't believe the right stuff. And that person, even though I knew them and John knew them, and they're scrubbed from existence. And we're supposed to now pretend like they never existed. Okay. And so the facts, there are no facts on postmodernism, right? No facts of history. And so I just thought, here's another interesting aspect of how postmodernism can play out. It doesn't just affect today, but it also affects history and how we view what happened yesterday. Yeah. And that's kind of scary too, because we have Holocaust museums. I've been to the one in New York, and the reason they make these museums is so that we don't forget, right? Yeah. This is why we have Remembrance Day in Canada, and I think is it Memorial Day in the States?
Yep.
Where we're supposed to look back lest we forget what happened in the past. But on this view, the whole thing could be turned on its head. The Holocaust, they could come up with a museum tomorrow that argues that everything was okay and we should have another Holocaust. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know it sounds crazy, but if this view is true, and I don't even know what that means to say this view is true. Because if it was, you know what I'm saying? This is the self-refuting nature of it.
True. This view is false.
Yeah, that's right. But if someone were to apply this view consistently, maybe that's the best way to put it. That's what you'd end up. You could get there. You can connect those dots. Those are the consequences. And we may not see them today, but just give it enough time and you'll see those down the road, right? Yeah. Certainly possible. There's nothing to stop it.
I love the way Sire puts it. It's really great. He says the pastness of the past disappears into the mist of the present moment. Mm-hmm. And he goes on to say that the postmodern historian does not use imagination to recreate for the readers a sense of the past itself, but creates a past in the image of the present and in accord with the judgment of the historian. Yeah. That is so dangerous.
Yeah.
So it's the historian, it's the one writing history that's going to decide what history happened.
Yeah. That's scary stuff. The historian is supposed to be finding out what happened in the past, not telling you what they want to have happened in the past. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a difference between the discovery of what happened in the past and just inventing what happened in the past.
Yeah, he says, Sire at one point, I think, says that history becomes just a hall of mirrors.
Yeah.
You know, reflection of itself.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Ideas have consequences, Tim.
So is there any, I know we're getting, close to and we don't have to go to the full hour on this one because I don't think it even merits it. Doesn't really deserve it. But did you see any redeeming qualities to postmodernism? Or is this, there's so many self-refuting things. I wrote down a couple because Sire does, he has a section of problems with postmodernism.
Yeah, it's critique of optimistic naturalism.
Mm-hmm.
It is what Sire points out as being one of the good things. That we place too much confidence in the ability of humans to reason. Mm-hmm. And we give too much credence to the scientific method. We try to have it explain more than it can, which is one of the things. How about you?
Yeah, I wrote that one down too. It's the idea that stories do give power. There's a seed of truth in that, right? There are, and we see those things. We call them, narratives, even in the news. Something will happen, and then you get a narrative that goes along with it, and that has power. You can have two news outlets. I'm not going to name anybody, but you could have two news networks reporting on the exact same event and have two completely different narratives, two completely different takes. And those stories end up getting some momentum. They have power, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I read something that was put out, and I guess there was some stories that the media wasn't reporting on leading up to the election. And they surveyed people to ask if that would have changed their mind. And these people they surveyed said, yeah, if we had known the full extent of these stories, we would have changed our minds. And that just shows, I don't know, we'll never know if that's actually true, if they would have. But that at least, I think, gives some evidence to this idea that these stories, these narratives, they have power, right?
Yeah.
But what we want to say is there's a truth. There actually is a meta-narrative, a story that it corresponds with reality. And if it doesn't correspond with reality, then that's fake news. That is not true. And if we want to talk like that, you can't be a postmodernist.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's ultimately the way that we should be seeking to live our lives, right? Is in search of truth and to align our life as best we can to that which is true, that which actually reflects the way the world really is. Yeah. I often say, I don't know if I mentioned it when I was talking to my students, that, I don't believe Christianity because it makes me feel good. I don't believe it because it certainly hasn't gained me any more money. I go from working a law firm to raising my own support at Stand to Reason. I'm not upgrading, and it hasn't gained me any more popularity or friends or any of the stuff that the world would tell you is success. I believe Christianity. I'm a Christian because I believe it's true.
Yeah.
And on postmodernism, it completely cuts the knees out from any type of meaningful or purposeful life outside of yourself. Philip here, he makes a comment that I think is good. I don't know if you can see it. It says, many individuals in Western culture have become so self-absorbed and narcissistic that postmodernism is a perfect solution as long as you don't examine it too closely. I think that there's some real, that's a good comment. It's a little harsh, but I think it's a good assessment, Philip. You know, we are absorbed.
And it goes along with that. Sire, I think he said it a couple times in the book now. He said the examined life, according to this philosophy, is not worth living, right?
Yeah.
The examined life, Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. But it's when you actually take this worldview or this philosophy and apply it, then it truly is the examined life that is actually not worth living. Now he's not telling people to go kill themselves. He's just saying these are the consequences, because there is no ultimate meaning or purpose in the world. You can create your own, but that's still, I mean, it's kind of an illusion, right?
At least made up. Yeah.
Yeah. So another thing that I thought was had a seed of truth is he says, or I wrote down here, we do have a limited perspective. I mean, you know, they're talking about how we all have our bring our story or our meta narrative to something, you know, or we have our perspective or our opinion. And of course, they take that to the nth degree, that there is no truth because of that, you know, and we all have to bring our own meaning. But the seed of truth is, well, yeah, we do have limited perspective. You know, John has his perspective, Tim has his perspective, and the where they go too far is to say, well, that means that there is no true perspective, and we would just say, well, look at, maybe Tim's wrong, maybe John's right, or whatever, you know. And they make the claim that, well, society, whatever the society is constructs, that's what's true, or that's what has meaning, or maybe it's a better way to put it. And it's true that society does mold some of our beliefs, but again, this misses the point. We want to know what's actually true. And so the whole society could construct a society that says rape is okay. That wouldn't make it okay. That would not make it good and right. It would still be wrong. And so it does have these seeds, but it just takes them, it comes to faulty conclusions.
Yeah, and I think that's actually what you just said kind of highlights one of the significant downfalls, or just a really bad thing that comes out of postmodernism in relation to history, is the way that we move forward in history is to survey what's happened in the past and say, oh, wait a second, we don't ever want to do that again.
Yeah.
And that's how you become a better society, right? That's how you move forward. That's how you progress.
Yeah.
Where if you apply a postmodern lens to history, you can't do that, you know, because it becomes relativistic. You know, the historian is one who brings meaning, and there's no moving forward in any real sense at all.
Like you can't use words like moving forward and progress. That forward means entails us, like you're going towards something, you know, like a standard. Now you could just change. I mean, why not move backwards on postmodernism?
Yeah.
There's, you know what I'm saying? Like, so those words kind of lose their meaning. There is no progress. Not ultimately. You're just changing your views and your beliefs, or what they might call your social construct.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're exactly right about that.
Yeah.
And then when we get to the critiques, you know, and we've kind of gone through some of these, but there's so many self-refuting. The rejection of all meta-narratives is a meta-narrative. And so if you're rejecting all meta-narratives, well, that in itself is a meta-narrative that you should reject. And so again, this is not livable. It's self-refuting. I wrote down number 2 was no access to reality is a claim to know what's going on in the world in reality. So you can't say something like, well, postmodernism is true because we don't have access to reality. We only have our own subjective social constructs, our own meta narratives, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, the claim that you can't access reality seems to know something about reality, right? That you can't access it, which seems to be self-refuting as well.
Yeah. I love the way I mean, I just underlined on all of these critiques here, first, the rejection of all mirror narratives is itself a meta narrative.
Yeah.
Second, the idea that we have no access to reality and that we can only tell stories about it is itself, it is self-referentially incoherent, and he just like goes through all these things. Postmodernism critique of autonomy and sufficiency of human reason rests on the autonomy and sufficiency of human reason. It's just like one after another, these views just completely die in and of themselves. And there's one statement in here that I really, really liked.
Yeah.
In reference to one of the, he says, postmodernism pulls the smiling mask of arrogance off the face of naturalism. Which I kind of liked, the face behind the mask displays an ever-shifting countenance. There's the anguish of Nietzsche railing against the herd mentality of the mass of humanity, the ecstatic joy of Nietzsche, willing into being the overman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
this was a good chapter. I mean, now that I think about it, now that I look back on it, a lot here, but I think of most of the chapters that we've read, I feel like this one actually, even though it's philosophically kind of difficult to understand sometimes, I really do think that this one probably has the most implications to certainly what I think me and you do.
Yeah.
Like I don't know many people. I don't know a ton of people who go around and say that they're atheists. I mean, I know a few. But I don't know, but I know a ton of people who go around and espouse a postmodern view of truth or a postmodern view of morality.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it's everywhere. We see it in every debate every issue, major issue in the culture that we're speaking against right now, we see it. So I highly recommend, this whole book, but definitely reading this chapter.
Yeah. This is foundational stuff. And it's helpful to understand this to help understand what's going on in the culture, right? And what your friends are talking about and family member who might be taken in by it without even really realizing it, And that's
the idea of work, right? That's the way it works. Like we said, it trickles down through the academy, these high lofty things that just sound absurd, but people actually believe them, and then they teach them, and the next thing you know, a generation later, it's the prevailing view that's influencing everything out in the world.
Yeah.
So it's important to know.
Yeah, and this is why you've been doing quite a bit of research on critical race theory, because this seems to be the next ideology that's trickling down from the academy. That's maybe trickling is not the right word. It seems to be kind of crammed down the throats of
trickling for a long time.
Yeah, and so it's going to be affecting, I think, the culture at large. If it hasn't already, it's coming. And so to understand these ideas and where they're coming from and how to respond to them is huge. So this one's been around for a while, and I think it's been soundly refuted. And Sire just highlights a few of those things. So we definitely want to recommend this book, right? If you haven't picked it up, you definitely want to grab it. The Universe Next Door. It's just a catalog of worldviews, and we thought it'd be fun to go through. I don't know, is this our sixth? Something like that. So this is our last class, though. We're not going to spend any more time on this particular book, I don't think. Alan's normally the guy who organizes.
He's the glue.
He is the glue. And so we survived without him. And hopefully when we pick a new book, he'll be around. It would be great to get Amy Hall involved.
Yes.
I tried to get her on today, but she is busy with lots of stuff. So I actually, John, maybe we can talk about this. There is a book. The author is the guy who started. It's a Twitter atheist following. the Atheist Republic.
Yeah.
And he has memes. There's like 100,000 followers on that thing. Most of the memes and arguments are just so bad. But he's written a book called There Is No God. And I think it's like 20 arguments against God or something like that. And I'm thinking it's like $7. Maybe we should buy something.
If one of the arguments is who made God, we aren't doing it.
Yeah. It would be, but we could take 2 arguments or something, or maybe we just, a few classes. It would be fun just to respond. To read a book. I think the next one needs to be something we don't agree with. And we just take it on. So maybe it's a book from an atheist. I'm just thinking that one because it just came out not too long ago. We could
how many book clubs have we done? Is this our second or third?
This is our, I think it's our second. People don't know this, but we had a book club before there was online book clubs, right? It was us reading. So that's where the confusion is, because we've read a few other books, but we did Tactics and then this one. I think that's it.
So we never did Story of Reality.
No, we haven't. So we could do that one too.
No, I like the idea of doing something we disagree with.
Does anyone in the chat, I don't know if anyone's watching right now, but any suggestions, you just throw them in the chat there. And we will take a look. But it seems like we're leaning towards something that is from an unbeliever's perspective. And maybe we can read it and talk about it. Because it's good. We need to be reading the other side.
Always.
Yeah. And finding out what arguments are they offering? And for something like this,
I appreciate about Sire is he obviously did a lot of legwork into the other side and then quoted the top scholars of each of these views.
Yeah.
So you're not getting a watered down version of them. It's the truth. It's the true version, which is important.
Yeah. Sire is a Christian. He's a theist, but he tries to, as he's describing the worldview, he presents it, as if this is what they believe, and here's the main players of this particular philosophy or worldview. So it would be good to get a book. I was thinking like Christopher Hitchens or because those books, those are cool books for this kind of thing, because you can put a whole bunch of chapters with specific issues. And then the next class is different because it's different issues, or like a Richard Dawkins, God Delusion, classic. It's old, but his ideas have influenced, right?
I did like a whole critique of that in grad school.
Okay, so you could run that. So we'll see. We'll see what people want. Maybe we'll do a survey, put it out on YouTube or Facebook with a few books and just see where it goes.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
I like
do a little poll.
Do a poll.
All right. Sam Harris, Relative Morality. Not sure.
What's the Sam Harris book that Ravi Zacharias
it's
combated?
There's Letters to a Christian Nation. And there's is it called his book was called The End of Reason. Ravi's book, I think, was The End of Reason. Yeah. And I think he was responding to Letters to a Christian Nation.
I think so.
So maybe that's the book. I mean, that could be a good book. The Moral Landscape, that's a good book. But the only problem with that book is it deals with one issue. And if we want to do multiple sessions together, multiple classes, I don't know if that would work out. I mean, we could probably just respond to the main argument in one lesson, which William Lane Craig does really well, looking at that particular argument, I think. Anyways.
His debate with Sam Harris was amazing.
Yeah, it was a great debate. So I'm thinking more of a book that gives kind of like a bunch of, every chapter's on something different, So I think Letters to a Christian Nation would actually be a good one. but anything from the new atheists
Who aren't new anymore.
Well, they're not new, and so that's why I'm thinking this guy from the Atheist Republic. I mean, the book is sold. I was going to buy it the other day, and there was thousands of reviews, and there was a lot of good reviews. And I just that to me that doesn't make sense in light of the fact that the memes and tweets coming out of that channel are just some of the worst. I mean, they're just not even close to understanding the big issues. So maybe we do that, man. I think it would be fun.
I think it'd be fun too. Yay. Okay. See, we did okay without Alan. Who needs him?
I say we cut him from the team.
I'd trade Alan for Amy.
Oh, any day.
In like a heartbeat. But Amy's going to make us all look a little less smart.
I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that too. She'll give us all the right answers. So yeah.
All right.
So hey guys, thank you guys so much for watching and sticking with us through the book club. It's been 14 weeks. I mean, 7 sessions, but 14 weeks total.
Yeah.
That's insane. So
everyone keep
your eye out to the social media platforms, I guess, of STR.
Yeah.
And we'll go from there. All right, guys. Have a good day. Bye.
Yeah.